This past Wednesday, the NFL Player Engagement Department held a webinar, basically telling everyone who wanted to attend or who did attend what player engagement is. So I went. Here's number one, what I learned. Here's my observations, and then my thoughts on player engagement, the player development space. It was a really good meeting. I'll get to my observations. I don't want to give too much yet, but shout out to the NFL Player Engagement staff for creating that opportunity and making it happen. So I have some notes here, so I'm gonna just go through the notes kind of all the way, maybe not in super detail, but we'll just kind of figure out what we'll roll on. But yeah, once again, you all signed up who were there. Give it a like if you were there. Like, subscribe, and share. Over 500 people at this webinar. Over 500. I think the highest number I counted was 532. Oh yeah, I was there, of course. But I counted about 532, so over 500 people. One thing I think is pretty interesting, before they started talking about the NFL I call it PE. So if you hear me say NFL PE, it's player engagement, or if I say PD, it's player development. If I just forget and I abbreviate, there it is for you. But when they talked about what they're doing before they got started, they started talking about longevity. You know, a lot of people in their staff have been there 30 plus years, 20 plus years, and their staff's maybe 8 people. But you kept hearing this longevity. I've been here so long. And whenever I hear that, I always remind myself, like, first of all, I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like, I've always thought, my dad worked in the same place for 33 years. I found out in my career that's probably a path that I most likely won't be on unless, well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how long I'll be doing beyond the field. But and it's pretty cool to hear that. The second thing is, I've gotten older. Whenever you hear longevity, that means that that person enjoys that role. They're not leaving that role. That person or those people love that role. They're not leaving that role. So unless a new role is created or new roles are created, there is not a lot of space for one to enter. And so that's not a negative thing. That's just a reality, right? And so some of you all may be listening to this. Maybe you were a college student who was on the call and you hear that, like, oh, that's awesome. I would love to work somewhere for 30 years. But remember, you're trying to get in. People do not, whenever you hear longevity, number one, that means that they love what they do. There's the place they work is a great place to work at because they're there. But the other thing you should think of, the reality is that there isn't anything new being created, or that role is not going to leave unless, and your entry path, which is a better way to say it, is going to have to be created. So I started about that there because they started off with some longevity. I think they spoke about, and I don't know everybody's names. I wrote some names. I think Tracy Perlman's been there 32 years. That's pretty awesome. But anyway, all right, so let's start off. So they start off with the mission. The mission of NFL Player Engagement is to serve, equip, and empower the player and his ecosystem. So I thought this was pretty cool. I have learned this from the people I know in the space: Jess Gray, Alexander Martin, Fernando Velasco, Dr. Lori Robinson. I know a few others, and Dr. Lacey Carmen Johnson, who does it in the NBA. But one thing that is different from player development, which I have experience in on a college level, and player engagement at the NFL to professional level, is the ecosystem part, right? You're taking care of that player and their ecosystem. So that could be their spouse, children, whoever falls under that, right? That doesn't happen in college. I am responsible for that player and that player only, you know? Now, in the player development role I was in, do you have some influence on maybe a significant other, maybe a brother, sister, maybe parents, whatever it may be? Yes, you have influence, but you're not responsible for them. So I thought that was pretty interesting to hear that. Another thing they talked about was they innovate opportunities for players to grow throughout their playing cycle. I think that's pretty cool. I've learned that from people in the space, innovating those opportunities through a player cycle, right? I think I was talking to somebody actually today, and they were talking about, hey, you help players when they're done with sports. I said, no, I help them. Or he said life after sport. I said, help them with life in sport as well. And so it's interesting to see the similarity there as you're creating growth while playing is happening. Next note here. I'm writing them, y'all. Sorry, I just kind of listened to it and started going. Program cycle resource. All right, we'll skip. Okay, so here are the 4 main pillars of player engagement to the players, and then they have one for the professionals in the player development role, which I think is pretty awesome. But the 4 for the players in the NFL is continuing education, financial literacy, personal development, and professional development. And these are things that are really good. They broke it down, and I'll talk about each one, but it's awesome to hear those 4 pillars. Once again, they're continuing education, financial literacy, personal development, and professional development. The fifth pillar, is to support the heads of player engagement, those who lead the 32 teams. So in the CBA, there is a requirement that each team has a director of player engagement. Now, some teams have 1 person, some people have 2, some have 3. It's all kind of based on what the team wants to do, which is very similar to college football. When I worked in college football, most, not all, have someone in player development. It's up to the coach, the administration, if they want more than 1 person. And so that's awesome that they're getting the support that they need in that role. So let's start off with continuing education. This was pretty interesting to hear. I'll tell you why. There's a lot of similarity with player development, but basically, the NFL has tuition benefits for players. So if players want to go back and finish their bachelor's or get their master's, when I was at the University of Houston, we had a couple players who had opportunity to play in the NFL who came back and got their degrees. So there's a tuition benefit from the NFL, but it's not only for degrees, it's also for certificates, which is pretty awesome. So if a player wants to do something, they help players do whatever they want to do. Now, the person who is heavily involved with the continuing education is the head of player engagement for that specific team. Now, this was pretty interesting because I just made a post on LinkedIn about being the academic liaison in the player development space. And I was talking to my webinar, and we were talking about, pro and college. I was like, you know what? No, you're not necessarily the academic liaison, like hands-on every single day, as I have been in player development. But there is an aspect of that. Now, some of you all watching this, you keep saying how you've been in player development. I got going. I was excited. Forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ed Jones. I'm the founder of Beyond the Field Player Development. Hey, we are here to help equip people to impact the lives of athletes through programs, courses, and resources like the one you're looking in right now, which is the Player Development Pod. Thank you so much for being here. I am able to speak from a space of authority because I was a director of player development at the University of Houston, University of Kansas, and Baylor University. I also wrote 2 books about player development. You can find all that stuff in the show notes. So yeah, that's what I'm able to say when I was in the role, for you all to who's this guy? So there's more information about me in the notes, but this is about you and what was learned in the meeting so you can get help. But I thought that was pretty cool that there is a similarity, like I said, with the academic piece. It's not the everyday academic liaison that a director of player development does, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that director of player engagement is meeting with academic people every single day. And that probably happens most likely in the off season. So that was pretty cool. So they talked about the financial arm, the financial literacy, and shout out to Usama Young, who I got to know in the space. He's crushing it there in the NFL. But he talked about the 4 main things that when you talk about financial literacy with the players, which is budgeting, credit, taxes, and investing. I thought that was really awesome that they're taking the time to walk this path with the players, right? There's players now with NIL, there's a little more, or should be a little more, education on the financial side, specifically the budgeting piece, right? I think that's a level that, in my experience in the role, when I was in the role, that sometimes head coaches I work for or other people I work with in programming, sometimes we skip over the budgeting piece and talk credit or taxes or investing. And it's like, how can we talk about investing if they don't understand budgeting? So it's pretty cool to see them walk that step path, budgeting, credit, taxes, and investing. I think that every player should take advantage of that. And that's, I'll get to something someone said a little later, but players are coming more equipped now to understand that. So shout out to a lot of directors of player development at the college level who are sowing those seeds that Usama and the NFL Player Engagement Office and the directors of player engagement for the 32 clubs are able to water there. So that's pretty cool as well. And then another pillar, the third pillar they have, third pillar is professional development. Shout out to Ashley Smith, who I know as well, who's in the role. And what they're doing here is a lot of programs and workshops on the professional development side. I know I saw it on LinkedIn. And there's a lot of stuff here. I believe the NFL Player Engagement has their own LinkedIn page, so go check that out as well. A lot of this information I'm giving you is not top secret. But I'm really doing this because I get a lot of questions about player engagement, and we'll talk about that at the end. So I want to provide a space here. I've also interviewed people in the role. So at the end of this video, you'll have a playlist. Matter of fact, not the end of the video. Right now, there's a playlist of the people who I've interviewed who are in this role. Could talk deeper about this. But anyway, Ashley Smith had some on LinkedIn a couple years ago where they went around. I think it was fashion, New York. It was pretty cool to see some of the players learn about fashion. So she's creating programs and workshops, not only for players, but for legends. And legends is identified as someone who played in the NFL. So it's awesome to see those programs there from the professional development side. And then the last piece is the personal development side, which they're working on that athlete being the best person they can be, really diving into the leadership aspect of these players, what they're learning, the assets, the skills that they have, the intangibles that are great. And so it was good hearing about the programming there. So this is even before they got to the panel of those who lead with teams. And so I thought this was a great basis for anyone who, like I said, you could be a college student who didn't know, or maybe you're a professional that wants to transition. And so I thought this was a really good area to show what player engagement can be, or is, excuse me, from the NFL office, with continuing education, financial literacy, personal development, and professional development. So those were really cool. Now we're going to talk about how they support those in player engagement that are at the clubs. But before I say that, if you want to see, I have a interview here with Fernando Velasco. I was able to do it in person when I was in Atlanta. And if you love these in-person interviews, I want to call you to sponsor the Player Development Pod so that we can move into different areas and we're able to go around and do these interviews. I would love to do a day in the life, whatever it may be, but we need funding and we need you to be the one to support and sponsor. Hit me up, email me at info@btfprogram.com if you are the one who wants to not only sponsor, but get your name, your company, your business out to many as we spread the player development, player engagement, athlete development message. All right, so now talking about the fifth pillar, which is dedicated to those in the player engagement space. And one thing they talked about is they do club visits. So they visit every club once a year, and that's a lot. I think their staff is 8. Even with that many people, getting those different visits can be a lot because you want to visit the club when things are happening, from my understanding. But they do club visits where they support those that are in heads of player engagement at the club level or team level, whichever one works for you. And so they go there. They're talking about the rookie and mandatory programming. They're looking at speakers that are coming through, seeing if everything's kind of aligned with the player engagement guidelines they're applied or given by the NFL. I want to see you at the Player Development Summit. It will be live here in Kansas City, and the dates are May 29th through the 31st. Just click the link in the show notes to purchase your early bird tickets. All right, so before they got to speak to those who are in the role, one thing they talked about is their big timeline. Their season takes off during the off season. And that is a huge similarity to the player development role. Now, and that's where you get more program. That's when you get more time. And this is speaking from the NFL Player Engagement office. They said that their season gets going in the offseason. Those people who are in the role, they're doing it all year. They're doing programming all year, and it does take off when there's more time. I mean, that's very similar. You all get it. Those players are playing. It's hard to do a lot of programming when players are playing, but when they're not, it's a great opportunity to get some things done. All right, so they went into a panel with 3 people serving in the role. The first was Kelsey Harkins with the Buffalo Bills. The second is D'Angelo Shears with the Las Vegas Raiders. And the third is my guy, Fernando Velasco, who's with the Atlanta Falcons. And so the first thing they asked was, what do you do in the role? What does your role look like? I'll share a few notes on what they said. But Kelsey, she started, once again, she's with the Buffalo Bills. She says she does a lot on the logistics and the administration side, helping players transition to Buffalo. Thought that was pretty cool. I've talked about this before. Programming is also, I think a lot of people see player development and they think, yeah, you're definitely there for them, but there is a lot of logistics, there's a lot of administration, there's a lot of hands-on stuff that you have to do in the role to prepare people for that transition. And that's just like the NFL, the college. Now, when I was in it, I started in 2016. Now it's a lot more similar with transition like the NFL. I don't want to call it transactions, it's not that. But your athletes move a lot more than they did when I started. So that transition is huge. D'Angelo Shears talked about some of the things he did. And one thing I thought was pretty interesting is he's head of the IR program, or injury reserve program, and he's head of the professional development program. I really wrote down the IR program because I think one of the biggest areas you could develop athletes, in my experience, even when I was a high school coach to when I got in the role, is those who are injured or find themselves missing an extended time from the players. It is tough. I've had an injury before when I played. Your injury, your rehab, it's just you. You feel like you're a part of the team, but you're not near the team. So there's like this weird kind of reality going on, even though it's going to be a small reality for most. But there's a lot of opportunity to develop. I've created some of the biggest bonds and got a lot of players who didn't do programming initially to start doing programming and seeing the resources we have through being down there in the training room or when they're rehabbing or taking them there, whatever it may be, being that support while they're there. It can be lonely when you're injured, and having that opportunity, having that person that's dedicated to providing encouragement and sowing seeds during that time is huge. And then the professional development program, he helps as well. They do, I don't know, he didn't dive too deep into it, but I'm pretty sure they do an incredible job of connecting players with people in Las Vegas and beyond. And so that's pretty cool when we talked about his role. Fernando, and you've listened to the podcast earlier. If you have listened to the podcast, I want you to like. And y'all need to like. The more y'all like, the more this spreads on to other students like yourself who want to learn about player engagement. But he talked about the big thing is serve. And when I did a podcast with Fernando, he's big on serving. Serving. He sees his entire role as being able to serve and then take the resources given to him and create a holistic plan. After that, they answered a question about their path to the role. And this was pretty interesting. And the moderator, who I forget the moderator's name, brought this up. And Ashley said it a little earlier in that webinar that, player development is not linear. It's not like you graduate and then you get a GA position in player development and then you're a coordinator, manager, director, assistant AD. A lot of people in player development have went different ways or different places in their career. I'm actually going to talk about that in another podcast, which I'll share a little later. And so seeing this path of people and where they got to go before they got there, I won't spend too much time on everything there, but because you can reach out to them, learn their lessons. But one thing I found out, the similarity of every single one of them was there was an NCAA or a college athletics experience that they had. D'Angelo was a director of basketball operations. He did some stuff in production, ESPN, NFL Films, and then did a training camp intern with the Raiders and then got the spot there. Kelsey was an athletic trainer. Who took an internship with the Giants and then came with the Bills and then saw the position and transition there. She actually was at Baylor before I got there. So was at the college level. And then Fernando was he finished his playing career, worked at the University of Georgia, then was the head of director of player development at Arkansas, and then transitioned to the role. And so they all worked in collegiate sports. We'll talk about that a little later. Another thing that was pretty interesting, they all have a master's degree. I've been asked this multiple times by students and people, do you need to have a master's degree? Do you need to have a master's degree? Education is important. I'm not going to say you need it, but if you can get it, always say get it. If you have it, it'll help you. I know when you look at education or higher education, working in collegiate sports, whatever, it's going to help. Now, is there a degree that's going to get you straight into player development? No, because it's not linear. There are some that do help. I know University of Florida has an athlete development specialist. Shout out to them. They have brought, speaking of the Player Development Summit, they have brought over 8 students each year to that. So excited to see the Florida Gators in person. And I know Kansas State just opened up something with athlete development as well. So, hey, take it as you want to take it, but they all have master's degrees. Now, if you are a master's degree program and you're looking to get more students, hit me up. Hey, a sponsor, you'll get your university name on the podcast. I'll wear the shirt. We can make it happen. All right, so something I thought was pretty interesting. Someone asked this, and whenever I'm asked this, I'm always kind of like, well, what's that question mean? Is this kind of like a filler question or is this a real question? But someone said, what is your why? What is your why? And they all explained it. And of course, all of it had to do, every single why had to do with people. You cannot be in this space and not your why not be people. If you're in this space because you want to make money, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this route to make money, or I wouldn't go this route to make money. And so it just made me think, like, one thing I always tell people in my webinar, and the link to the show notes to get to a player development webinar is in the show notes. The link to get to the player development webinar is in the show notes. But it's to understand your why. Understand your why before you get into it. Because player development, player engagement, player development I can speak of, player engagement I've heard. It looks nice. It's pretty cool when you see it on TV, but it has its days. Like, you're dealing with people. Not only the student athletes when I was there 1824, but you're dealing with adults who are still dealing with stuff that they dealt with that they haven't got done, taken care of, or you're dealing with egos and insecurities. And so what helps you stay, or help me stay on the straight and narrow, is that why. So understand your why. They talked about advice. One thing I thought that I took out of that is a couple things. Fernando said, have a heart of service. Kelsey said, be flexible, which I think is really huge. I always tell people that. And then D'Angelo talked about it's a thankless job. Then they went to mentorship. Every single one of them has a mentor, and every single one of them mentors. And then they talk about challenges in the role and things they wish they knew. One thing that was really cool, I'll highlight what D'Angelo said. And he said, it looks different everywhere you've been. Now, he's been with the Raiders, I believe, over 10 years. Once again, that longevity. And I bring up the longevity because a lot of you all want these roles. It's 32 teams, and there were over 500 people in the call. I think 530 at the 532 at the max, right? If every person on that call wanted a job with the NFL or got a job with the NFL, that means the NFL, those teams would have to hire 16 people per team. That's not happening. That's the coaching staff, and this is not going to happen. Owners are still understanding what player engagement is, just like athletic directors and head coaches are still understanding what player development is. And so that investment's not going to be there. But anyway, he talked about everything looks different. He talked about he had been there for a while where the current GM and coach is really into these players, knowing what they want to do when they're done playing. And there were other regimes where that wasn't necessarily the case, where, maybe people didn't support that players are looking for stuff to do and they should just be ball, and all ball. So it was interesting that challenge of it looks different everywhere you've been. I was in a player development webinar recently, and once one of the attendees asked, does it look different? I was like, it looks different every year, every semester, every coach, because it's all on their understanding of what player development is. So I thought that was pretty cool. One thing, going back, sticking with D'Angelo here, they talked about how is player engagement evolving, and he spoke about the NIL deals, that the players are navigating their finances earlier and that they're coming in more interested in off the field stuff than previous groups. So the rookies coming in, the 1 or 2 years, the younger guys coming in, they're interested in these off the field opportunities way earlier than those who have been there. So that's pretty awesome to hear. Shout out to those student athlete development professionals at the college level, those player development professionals at the college level who are crushing it and continuing to provide those resources for players. I won't spend too much time on the rest of these questions here. One thing I'll look at, they talked about networking, and I think somebody said networking is the new resume, who you know, how they know you. So always network, do it strategically. There were a couple questions asked to Kelsey as she's a woman in the space. So that someone asked about how are game days for her, and she talked about how she navigates it in that space. But yeah, that was pretty cool. Opportunity at the NFL Player Engagement office and the directors of player engagement for those three clubs, the Kelsey with the Buffalo Bills, D'Angelo Shears with the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm still getting used to saying that. And then Fernando Velasco with the Atlanta Falcons. So that was good. So now, here's my quick observations, things that I'm just, right after the meeting, I start jotting things down. Number one, they did a great job of answering the question of what is player engagement. And that's what they wanted to do. I thought they did a great job of answering what it looks like, not only at the NFL level, but what it looks like at the club level as well. And they answered what the role looks like. Now, are there probably people there who wanted to get a full layout of how do I get in your seat? Absolutely. But I think they delivered on what they said they would deliver on. And I thought that was pretty fantastic for them to do that. I talked about this. There's some longevity at the NFL Player Engagement Office level. So that's pretty, that the stability helps for those that are in the player engagement at the heads of clubs, because when the fifth pillar is supporting player engagement people, it's good to have people who have been there. You have those relationships to help there as well. But it just reminds me of something that I spoke to Jess Gray, who's going into her 4th year, I believe, or in her 4th season with the Detroit Lions. And she was saying, like, these positions, like, people are not just giving their positions away. They are in a space, number one, that they want to be in, they love, and they're supported either by their club or, as you heard, by the NFL player engagement space. So there's longevity there. That was an observation I continued to hear throughout the presentation. All presenters, as I said earlier, have worked in college athletics. Now I bring that up because I'm going to do a podcast, and it'll be one that I'll add to this. It'll kind of be a continuation of this. And I get a lot of questions where people are like, how do I get into player engagement, right? I'm talking about player development. I talk about what I've done in the role, and a lot of questions I get is player engagement. How do I get in the NFL? I was doing a cohort one time, and there was someone who actually was interested, and I was talking about, hey, this is what you're gonna learn, this is what you're gonna learn, and they were like, okay, so can you teach me player engagement stuff? And I was like, hey, you know, there are some differences, but the basis of developing an athlete are very similar, and in some cases the same. And that person was really hung up on player engagement. Will you have a player engagement person speak? I'm like, yes, but the people who I would bring in to speak worked in college. And so I don't want to push anyone's dream away. That's not the case, but I also want you to come into this space with reality. Here's the thing, you all. I would like to work as a director of player engagement if I had the opportunity and everything is right with me, or where I need to be, or my family, everything. If that opportunity came about, I still want that opportunity. I would like that opportunity. And so you have to think that there's a lot of people who want it, who have already either A, are in the role, or B, have created some value in the role, or A, have some longevity or some years doing it at the college level, who are ready for their shot. And so you have to get in where you can get in and just work your tail off to get there. But it was pretty interesting that all presenters have worked in college athletics. I'm actually doing a deeper dive on this. I'm gonna save it for the next podcast or a coming podcast that is this be like part B of this one right here. And then number 4, they gave advice and reality that it's not a lot of positions. I talked about this earlier at the NFL level. They ended it, I believe it was Keith Elias, who said, hey, thank you so much for being here. Just want to let y'all know it's 32 teams. And it's over 500 people here. And if you can start in college, start in college. And so once again, what I love that the NFL did is they said, hey, here's the role. This is what it looks like. But also here's the reality. And I think a lot of people in this space, what I meet, I've given the stories. I'm not going to harp on too many of these stories, but there is a great space in college. At the Player Development Summit, or it was the conference at the time, the last virtual, Alexander Martin did an entire presentation on not playing the internship Olympics, as he called it. Like, a lot of people jump from internship at this pro team to this pro team to this pro team to this pro team, and they skip the opportunity to work in college athletics, which is where he got his start. And he talked about how on LinkedIn he posts something that says, like, let's say for instance it says, I'm just going to use the NFL team. I'll use my favorite team, Houston Texans player engagement intern. And everybody, likes it. They reach out to him, and then let's say the same city, my alma mater, say University of Houston assistant director of player development for football. It's not as much engagement for a role that will pay you better, get you in a role, will allow you to do things that can go on your resume. So it's pretty interesting. But they gave advice to everybody, and they said, find a start in college. Now, are there going to be stories where people go straight into the NFL? Yes, most likely. But a lot of those are former players. So not only are you fighting people who competing with people who want to get into space, you're competing with people who are walking off the field who found out, oh man, Fernando Velasco I like what you're doing. What can I do, Fernando? How can I get in that? So you're fighting where a player is going to have more pull than Ed Jones, who's coming out the University of Houston as a senior. So those are quick observations there. And a lot of that has been mentioned before, but just want to leave that there for you. Now, here are my thoughts. The number one thing, it was pretty awesome that the NFL took time to do this. Now, the NFL took time, player engagement during week 12 of the NFL season. I need y'all to understand this. Week 12, where teams are fighting for playoff spots, for division leads, for so much. These heads of player engagement for the Bills, for the Raiders, for the Falcons took time to be there. So it's interesting. I thought that was pretty cool that the NFL got together and they put this together. And so that was really, really cool. The second thing, there's over 500 people there. Over 500 people there. Now, if you've ever checked out a podcast, a player development podcast, you know I'm passionate about this space. I think this might be podcast 173. Like I said earlier, I've written 2 books. I have a thriving player development newsletter, which you need to join right now. I'm about to create some other stuff, some other resource for everybody. But over 500 people, that's incredible for me because it shows that there's a huge number of people who want to make an impact in the lives of athletes. Now, granted, when it comes to NFL, I've seen it. There's people that just want to be in the NFL because it's cool. I get to take a picture next to CJ Stroud, Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Cam Hayward, whatever. That's a reality. You know, unfortunately it is. So I don't know how many of that 530 is in that realm, but to see a lot of people who are interested in the player engagement, the player development, athlete development space is so incredible. It is a space that for the last 8-9 years, I've devoted a lot of my time, my resources, and my energy to, and it's great to see that next generation of people who are interested in it. Another thing, one of my observations, as I'm looking at that number, I'm like, how many of these are students? How many are professionals transitioning, wanting to transition from another career? How many are professionals at the college level wanting to go to the NFL? And then how many of these are former players? That's just that's things that I think about. Like, what's the demographic of every single person that is there? As I get deeper into analytics and doing podcasts and holding conferences and the business side of running a business, because this is a business, you start to worry about demographics like that as well. And and so then the fourth thing, my next thought is like, man, would it be awesome if all 500 of those people showed up at the Player Development Summit, which will be here in Kansas City, May 29th through the 31st. We will have speakers here from the athlete development space. I'm working right now to get people from different leagues. We've done a lot with NFL, NBA, college football, trying to spread out and get almost every sport. Got some interesting meetings coming up. Be on the lookout. But yeah, I'm thinking like, man, that would be awesome if all 530 y'all, or at least 400 of y'all came to the Player Development Summit. So those are my thoughts. But overall, like I said, to go back and recap what I talked about, the meeting itself was a success. There was a lot of information shared. They shared the role. They gave a clear path to those looking to get in the role. Hey, college is probably a good start. And then just seeing over 500 people interested in player development, player engagement, athlete development is incredible. Now, you know what I always say for you all that are returners, you know what I always say here for you all that are new, this is how I end every podcast. Because some of you all went to that call and may say, well, I can't wait until I get in that role to impact athletes. But hey, you can go out and create generational impact. Don't wait. Create that generational impact today. Now, I have a playlist of player engagement people right here for you to check out. And this video right here, down here, is what YouTube thinks is best for you. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. And catch me on part B. See y'all.